Hey guys, tonight we are taking a little trip. Not to a different country, but to a different time. We're dialing our imaginary time machine back 500 years to the summer of 1518, and landing softly in a bustling city in what is now France. We're going to witness one of the strangest and most unsettling events in European history, a story that feels more like a bizarre fever dream than a documented fact. I'm not saying you'd last very long. Back then the general lack of modern plumbing alone would be a challenge for most of us, but tonight, you get to be an invisible, untouchable observer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find other people who enjoy these quiet, late-night historical journeys. And while you're at it, got me a comment and let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see where these stories end up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1518. You find yourself standing on a cobblestone street in the city of Strasbourg. It's July. The air is thick and warm, heavy with the unique smell of a pre-industrial city, a rich, earthy cocktail of baking bread, fermenting wine from the nearby vineyards, the sharp tang of tanning leather, and the ever-present, less than romantic scent of livestock and humanity living in very close quarters. Don't breathe too deeply. You look around you. The buildings are beautiful, in a slightly chaotic, leaning in for a gossip kind of way. Half-timbered houses with dark wooden beams and whitewashed plaster press against each other, their upper floors jutting out over the narrow street, almost close enough to touch the building opposite. The city is a vibrant, thrumming hub of activity. Strasbourg is a free imperial city, which is a fancy way of saying it's a self-governing and pretty important player within the vast and complex Holy Roman Empire. It's a crossroads of trade, and the streets are a testament to that. You watch as a heavy cart, its wooden wheels groaning under the weight of barrels of grain, rumbles past you, its driver shouting good-naturedly at a flock of geese waddling in his path. Merchants in dark, heavy robes discuss business in doorways, their voices a low murmur of German and the local Alsatian dialect. Life here is governed by rhythms. The rhythm of the church bells that ring out from the magnificent, single-spired cathedral, marking the hours for prayer and work. The rhythm of the guilds, the powerful organizations that control every craft, from the stonemasons to the butchers, ensuring quality but also enforcing a rigid social order. You might wander past a public bathish, which, contrary to what you might think, was less about quiet, private bathing and more of a bustling social center. Here's a little tidbit for you: these bathhouses were hubs of community life where people gossiped, made business deals, and even had meals served to them while they soaked. It was the 16th century equivalent of a spa day mixed with a business lunch. But beneath this veneer of structured, everyday life, there's a quiet tension. The past few years haven't been easy. There have been harsh winters, failed harvests, and famine. The price of bread, the staple of every person's diet, has been volatile. On top of that, new and terrifying diseases have been making their way across Europe. People are still whispering about the French disease, syphilis, which had arrived a few decades earlier, and other fevers and plagues are a constant lurking fear. People are, to put it mildly, stressed. They are pious, God-fearing folk, but they are also deeply superstitious and living with a baseline of anxiety that is hard for us to comprehend. Historians are still debating just how deeply this collective anxiety permeated society. Was it a constant, low-level hum of dread that people simply learned to live with, or was it a powder keg of social and psychological stress just waiting for a spark? For now, though, as you stand in this sun-drenched street, it's just another day. A woman is scrubbing her doorstep, a blacksmith's hammer rings out from a nearby alley, children are chasing a stray dog. The world feels solid, predictable, real. The sun is beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows down the narrow lanes. The air cools slightly. People are finishing their work, heading home, preparing for their evening meal, entirely unaware that the rhythm of their lives is about to be shattered by the strangest beat of all. A beat that will begin with a single person, on a quiet street, not so different from this one. A few days pass. The rhythms of Strasbourg life which you've been observing continue their steady, predictable beat. The sun rises, the bells chime, the market fills with people, the workshops hum while on a narrow street called Rue du Vieux Grains, watching the world go by. It's mid-July now, the heat is relentless, and the air is drowsy. Everything feels normal. Too normal, perhaps. And then you see her. At first, she's easy to miss. A woman, neither young nor old, dressed in the simple, drab clothes of a commoner. She's just standing in a small, sun-drenched patch of cobblestone. Then she begins to move. It's not a dance, not in any joyful or recognizable sense. Her feet start to shuffle, a hesitant, awkward twitch. Her arms lift, her hips sway. But there's no music, no rhythm, no reason. You watch, curious. A few other people pause their errands to stare. A baker, his apron dusted with flour, leans out of his shop. A couple of women on their way to the well stop and whisper to each other, hands covering their mouths. The initial reaction is one of mundane dismissal. She's had a bit too much of the new wine, someone mutters. Probably a row with her husband, another suggests. It's a momentary spectacle, a piece of street theatre in a city that has seen it all. But she doesn't stop. The sun climbs higher, beating down on the street, and she is still there. Her initial, awkward shuffling has movements. She twirls, she kicks, she flails her arms. There is no joy in her expression. Her face, which you can now see is slick with sweat, is a mask of bewilderment and exhaustion. Her eyes are wide, unfocused, as if she's looking at something no one else can see. She is trapped inside her own body, a puppet being jerked around by invisible strings. This is WWII. History, for all its records of kings and battles, is frustratingly silent about who this woman was before this very moment. We don't know her first name, her age, her profession, or what her life was like. She simply steps out of anonymity and into the historical record with a shuffling, inexplicable dance step. Some accounts say she was a farmer's wife, others just call her a resident. She is a ghost, defined entirely by this one bizarre public act. As the hours drag on, the small crowd of onlookers grows. The mood shifts from amusement to unease. This is no longer funny. It's unsettling. Children are pulled away by their mothers. The whispers change. This is something else. Is it a form of madness, a divine punishment made public? You can feel the collective anxiety rising like the heat from the cobblestones. People make the sign of the cross as they hurry past. Her husband, you hear someone say, has come and begged her to stop, to come home. She either can't hear him or can't obey. She just keeps dancing, her feet now scuffed and bloody inside her simple leather shoes. Her breathing is ragged, a desperate, rasping sound that is audible in the moments when the city's noise dies down. Historians still puzzle over the very first moments of this strange plague. Why that specific day in July? Was there a personal crisis, a private grief that tipped her over the edge into this physical manifestation of distress? Or was she simply the first domino to fall in a line that was already precariously balanced by famine, disease, and religious fear? The records, penned by men who were just as baffled as the onlookers, don't tell us. They only record what happened next. As evening approaches, the street begins to empty. People retreat to the safety of their homes, bolting their doors. But the story of the dancing woman is already spreading through the city like a contagion of whispers. And as the moon rises over the single spire of the cathedral, casting a silver light on the empty street, you see her still. A lone, silent silhouette, twitching and turning in the darkness. She hasn't stopped, and the most terrifying part is, it's only been one day. The morning light of the next day reveals a horrifying sight. WWII is still there. She has been dancing all night. Her clothes are torn and filthy. Her face is pale and drawn, her eyes are glassy. Her movements are weaker now, more like a desperate, continuous stagger than a dance, but they haven't ceased. She is a grotesque marionette, her energy fading, but her invisible master refuses to let her rest. The spectacle has crossed a line from bees to let her rest. It is no longer a curiosity, it is a public agony. You watch from a safe distance as a small group of people ventures closer. They are a mix of concerned neighbors and morbidly curious onlookers. They offer her water, but she can't seem to coordinate her hands to take the cup. They plead with her to stop, but their words are lost in the void of her strange compulsion. The problem is no longer contained to her. Her public, unexplained suffering is becoming a mirror, reflecting the city's own anxieties back at itself. Then something new happens. As you're watching, a man in the small crowd begins to twitch. He tries to suppress it, his face contorting with effort, but his leg starts to tap, then kick. His arms begin to swing. Within minutes he has joined her, his own movements, just as frantic and involuntary. A woman across the street lets out a small gasp, and then her own shoulders start to jerk. She claps her hands over her mouth, as if to stifle the affliction, but her feet begin to shuffle on the cobblestones. It happens just like that, one by one, then two by two. People who had come to stare, to gawk, to whisper, find themselves caught in the same invisible net. You see a teenage boy, a guild apprentice by his clothes, break away from his friends and start to leap and spin, a look of pure terror on his face. An elderly woman who had been leaning on a cane drops it with a clatter and begins a slow, agonizing jig. The transition from a single, isolated case to a group phenomenon is swift and terrifying. It's as if a switch has been flipped in the city's collective consciousness. The psychological barrier of it's happening to her, not me, shatters into a million pieces. This isn't just WWII's problem anymore. It's a public crisis unfolding in real time on the streets of Strasbourg. By the end of this second day, there are perhaps a dozen people dancing. Here's a curious detail from the chronicles of the times. Some accounts suggest that these new dancers didn't just mimic WWII. They each had their own style of convulsive movement. Some would hop on one foot, some would spin in circles, others would throw themselves to the ground and drift before getting up to dance again. It was a chaotic, unchoreographed ballet of mass hysteria. The city officials who had initially dismissed the incident can no longer ignore it. Members of the city council, the powerful group known as the Council of XXI, gather in hushed, urgent meetings. What is this? A disease, a new form of plague, divine retribution for some unknown sin, or is it, as some were beginning to whisper, the work of witchcraft? The academic debate on how precisely this spread is fascinating. Modern sociologists talk about motor mimicry, an unconscious human tendency to imitate the movements of others, especially in a heightened emotional state. Think of how you might wince when you see someone else get hurt. Now amplify that by 1,000 in a population primed by fear and superstition. Was it a kind of behavioral contagion, passed from person to person not by a germ, but by sight and suggestion alone? The exact mechanism is still a point of contention among scholars. You walk through the city now, and the atmosphere has changed completely. The normal sounds of commerce and life are punctuated by the slap-slap of bare feet on stone, the ragged gasps of exhausted dancers, and the sudden, chilling cries of those newly afflicted. The problem is no longer confined to that one street. Pockets of this bizarre dancing are erupting in different quarters of the city. Strasbourg is no longer just a bustling city, it is a city with a fever. And as the first week comes to a close, with nearly 100 people now in the grip of this relentless motion, everyone is asking the same question: how do you stop a plague that has no visible cause? The dancing no longer needs a specific location to erupt, it is now the grim, throbbing heart of Strasbourg itself. Within a week, the city has transformed. The air, once thick with the smells of bread and leather, now seems charged with a nervous energy, a constant, unspoken question hanging over everyone's head. Am I next? You walk through the marketplace near the cathedral. Usually, this place is a symphony of commerce, merchants hawking their wares, the clatter of coins, the lively banter of shoppers. Now, a strange quiet has fallen over some stalls, while others are surrounded by people talking in hushed, anxious tones. They are not discussing the price of wool or the quality of the latest fish catch. They are talking about the dancers. Did you hear about the butcher's son on Rue d'Est Unliers? A woman whispers, her hand shielding her mouth as if the words themselves could be contagious. Started twitching yesterday afternoon. They've locked him in the cellar. It's God's wrath, an old man declares, his voice trembling with certainty. We have strayed from the path. This is our penance. He points a shaky finger towards a small group of people dancing erratically near the public fountain, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. The stories spread faster than the dancing itself, mutating with each retelling. Rumors become fact, and speculation becomes gospel. Some say the dancers are possessed by demons, their bodies no longer their own. Others whisper of a secret coven of witches who have cursed the city, casting a spell that forces people to dance. A few, more practical minds wonder if there's poison in the water supply or perhaps in a bad batch of flour from one of the mills. Every theory, from the supernatural to the mundane, is floated in these desperate conversations. You see the social fabric of the city begin to fray. Neighbors eye each other with suspicion. A person stumbling on an uneven cobblestone earns fearful glances. A sudden laugh sounds too loud, too manic. Trust is eroding, replaced by a pervasive, creeping fear. The community, once bound by guilds, church, and shared civic pride, is becoming a collection of isolated, frightened individuals. Here's a small, telling detail about the social structure of the time your identity was deeply tied to your guild and your parish. You weren't just Hunts, you were Hunts, the tanner from Street Thomas's parish. This rigid social structure provided a sense of order and belonging, but this new affliction was no respecter of status. It struck the shoemaker's wife and the guildmaster's nephew alike. It was a terrifying equalizer, erasing social distinctions with its chaotic, convulsive movement. This breakdown of social hierarchy, historians argue, was one of the most frightening aspects for the city's elite. The city's leaders, the members of the Council of XXI, are in a state of controlled panic. They are men of order, of rules and regulations. Their world is one of ledgers, laws, and commerce. It doesn't fit into any known category of civic problem. You can't find it, you can't regulate it, and you can't negotiate with it. Their initial response is one of observation and containment, but it's clearly not working. You witness a poignant scene near the river. A man is holding his wife, who is trying to dance even as he restrains her. He is weeping, pleading with her, "Anna, please, it's me. Stop this." But her eyes are vacant, and her body continues to struggle against his grip, her feet still trying to find a frantic rhythm on the dusty ground. It's a scene of heartbreaking intimacy, made horrificously public. The debate among historians continues to this day: was this truly a spontaneous, bottom-up phenomenon, or was it amplified by the very attention it received in an age without mass media? Word of mouth was everything. Did the constant, fearful chatter create an atmosphere of such intense suggestion that it actually caused more people to succumb? It's the historic going viral, but with devastating physical consequences. As the second week of July bleeds into the third, the city is holding its breath. The whispers have grown into a roar of fear and confusion. The question is no longer what is happening, but what in God's name are they going to do about it? The authorities know they have to act. The pressure is mounting, and their eventual decision will be one of the most infamous and tragically misguided public health interventions in history. The panic in the streets has finally reached a tipping point, forcing the city's leaders out of their state of bewildered paralysis. The Council of XXI, Strasbourg's governing body, convenes an emergency session. They are powerful men merchants, guild masters, landowners accustomed to dealing with tangible problems like trade disputes, tax collection, and military threats. This dancing affliction, however, is maddeningly intangible. Imagine the scene: a dark, wood-paneled room in the city hall. The men are seated around a long, heavy oak table, their faces grim in the flickering candlelight. They need an expert opinion. So they do what any sensible, rational authority would do: they summon the doctors. The physicians of 16th century Strasbourg arrive, looking solemn and important in their long robes. You have to understand, medicine at this time was a world away from what we know today. It was a complex and often contradictory mix of ancient Greek theory, Christian theology, folk remedies, and astrology. The germ theory of disease is centuries away. The primary framework for understanding the body is the theory of the four humours, an idea inherited from Hippocrates and Galen. This theory posits that the body is filled with four basic substances, or humours: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. A healthy person has these four humours in perfect balance. Sickness, both physical and mental, is caused by an imbalance and excess or deficiency of one or more of these fluids. Your temperament, too, was believed to be determined by your dominant humor. A melancholic person had too much black bile, a choleric person too much yellow bile. So, the physicians examine the dancers. They can't do blood tests or brain scans. They do what they know, they observe, they confer, and they fit the bizarre symptoms into their existing medical framework. They watch the frantic, ceaseless movement, the flushed faces, the sweat, the exhaustion. They note the wild, uncontrolled energy. After much stroking of beards and learned consultation, they present their diagnosis to the council. It is, they declare with confidence, a natural disease. It is not, they assert, supernatural, not demons, not a saint curse. It is a medical condition caused by hot blood. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the council members. A natural disease, something they can understand, something with a physical cause. Hot blood, they repeat, nodding. It sounds plausible. The summer is hot, the dancers are hot, their blood must be hot. The logic, by 16th century standards, is impeccable. An excess of the blood humor, they explain, has overheated the brain, leading to this frenzied, delirious state. It strips away the terrifying whispers of witchcraft and divine wrath, replacing them with a neat, if completely wrong, medical explanation. A lesser-known aspect of humoral theory is its connection to the stars. Many physicians of the era were also practicing astrologers, and they believed the alignment of the planets could influence the body's humors. Some chronicles, like those by the physician and alchemist Paracelsus, who wrote about the event a few years later, suggest there were astrological explanations too. He had his own wild theories, blaming it on Frauen's defiant and shameless character, combined with some erotic thoughts and a touch of planetary influence. It's a perfect example of how science, morality, and mysticism were all stirred into the same pot. A question of why the physicians so confidently dismissed a supernatural cause is a fascinating one, and historians are still chewing on it. Was it a sign of a burgeoning scientific mindset, a proto-Enlightenment desire to find naturalistic explanations for strange phenomena, or was it a more political move declaring it a natural disease, put the solution back in the hands of the secular authorities, the council and their physicians, rather than ceding power to the church? They maintained control. So now they have a name for the problem: hot blood. A tidy, manageable diagnosis. The council members are relieved. The physicians look proud. They have identified the enemy. But a diagnosis is one thing, a cure is another. And the cure they are about to prescribe, based on this hot-blown catastrophe, will turn a strange crisis into a full-blown catastrophe. The city of Strasbourg, armed with the best medical advice of 1518, is about to lean into the madness. Having received the expert medical diagnosis of hot blood, the Strasbourg City Council now faced a critical decision. What's the treatment if the problem is an overheating of the humors causing a frenzied energy? The solution, according to the physicians, was not rest. Rest would allow the hot blood to stagnate, to fester. No, the cure was counterintuitive and, as it would turn out, catastrophic. They prescribed more dancing. Their reasoning, filtered through the strange lens of humoral theory, went something like this: the body is desperate to expel this excess heat, this toxic energy. The dancing is a natural, albeit uncontrolled, attempt to do just that. It's like a fever, you need to sweat it out. Therefore, the authorities concluded the best way to cure the dancers was to encourage them to keep dancing day and night, until they had burned off the hot blood and their humors returned to a state of equilibrium. In essence, a city-sanctioned, medically prescribed rave. You can imagine the council meeting where this was decided. A councilman, let's call him Herr Schmidt, leans forward. So you're telling us, to cure the dancing, we should make them dance more? The physician, confident in his ancient Greek medical texts, would have nodded sagely. Precisely. We must facilitate the process. They must dance themselves back to health. It is the only way to expel the morbid humor. It is the very definition of an if you can't beat him, join in public health policy. This decision marks a pivotal moment in the crisis. The city's leadership, the supposed rock of stability, has just officially endorsed the very madness that is tearing the city apart. Instead of trying to quell the chaos, They are about to amplify it. They are going to pour gasoline on the fire, believing it to be water. This like cures like principle, while sounding bizarre to us, wasn't entirely out of place in premodern medicine. It's a concept known as homeopathy's ancestor, the idea that a substance in a healthy person can cure symptoms in a sick person. While this Strasbourg case is an extreme and distorted version, the core idea of fighting fire with fire was not unheard of. Here, however, it was being applied not to a substance, but to a compulsive behavior. The decision is made. The official decree goes out. There will be no more attempts to restrain the dancers, no more locking them in cellars or tying them to beds. Instead, the city will provide them with the space and the means to dance their fever out. It's a stunningly absurd solution, a piece of black comedy written into the historical record. As you stand in the streets of Strasbourg, you hear the town criers announcing the new policy. People gather, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and a desperate desire to believe that the authorities have a plan. Let them dance, the crier proclaims. By order of the council, the space shall be cleared. Let them dance until the sickness leaves them. Historians still debate the council's true motivations. Was this a genuine, if tragically flawed, attempt to follow the best medical advice available to them, or was there a more cynical element at play? Some scholars suggest it was a desperate attempt to control the narrative. By organizing the dancing, they could contain it, manage it, and turn a chaotic, terrifying spectacle into a structured, observable treatment. It was a way to reassert authority over a situation that was spiraling out of their control. If people are going to dance uncontrollably in the streets, they might as well do it in a designated area, under the watchful eye of the city guard. The immediate effect of this decision is profound. The few healthy citizens who had been trying to help their afflicted loved ones, to restrain them and coax them into resting, now have to stand down. The city has sanctioned the madness. The invisible barrier of social disapproval is gone. What was once seen as a terrifying affliction is now being reframed as a bizarre, citywide therapy session. The stage is now set for the next phase of the tragedy. The city is no longer fighting the dancing plague. It is actively encouraging it. The full, institutional weight of Strasbourg is about to be thrown behind this cure. And you, the invisible observer, are about to witness just how terribly wrong that can go. The city is about to build a dance floor for a plague. The council's decision, as bizarre as it was, is now the law of the land. And in 16th century Strasbourg, when the council gave an order, it was carried out with swift German efficiency. The plan to dance the plague away wasn't just a suggestion, it was a full-blown public works project. Your attention is drawn to the heart of the city, to the bustling corn market. It's a large, open square, normally filled with grain merchants and their heavy carts. But now, it's being cleared. Carts are being wheeled away, stalls are being dismantled. In their place, a new kind of structure is beginning to rise. You watch as a team of skilled carpenters, the same men who would normally be building houses or repairing church pews, get to work. They are building a stage. A large wooden platform, raised a few feet off the cobblestones. The sound of their hammers and saws echoes through the square, a stark, deliberate rhythm that temporarily drowns out the ragged breathing and shuffling feet of the afflicted. It's a surreal sight, the creation of a venue for a party that no one wants to attend. The stage is not for a traveling theatre troupe or a visiting dignitary. It is being built specifically for the dancers. The idea is to give them a central, dedicated space to carry out their grim therapy. To get them off the narrow, crowded streets and into a controlled environment where they can, theoretically, dance themselves to exhaustion and back to health. As the structure takes shape, you notice the reactions of the onlookers. There's a profound sense of confusion. Some people seem relieved, clinging to the hope that this official intervention, however strange, might actually work. They see the stage as a symbol of order being imposed on chaos. Others look on with a growing sense of dread. They see a monument to the city's madness, a public platform designed to showcase, and perhaps even encourage, the very thing they fear. This wasn't the only stage. One of the most persistent and debated details of the dancing plague is the claim, found in several contemporary and near-contemporary accounts, that the authorities didn't just build one stage, but several. They also reportedly cleared out and reserved two of the city's largest guild halls, the Carpenters Guild, and the Tenors Guild, turning their spacious meeting rooms into indoor dance halls. Here's a little architectural tidbit: a guild hall in a city like Strasbourg was a significant center of power and community. It was where the masters of a craft met, set prices, trained apprentices, and held lavish banquets. They were symbols of civic pride and order. The act of emptying these revered halls and turning them over to the frenzied dancers was a powerful statement. It was the city sacrificing its sacred secular spaces to the affliction, all in the name of a cure. The construction of the stage raises a critical question that historians still puzzle over. What was the psychological impact of this act? Did it legitimize the condition for someone teetering on the edge of the hysteria, feeling the phantom rhythms in their own limbs? Did seeing a stage built by the authorities send a signal that this behavior was now accepted? Even expected? Did it lower the psychological threshold for joining in? Some scholars argue forcefully that this was the single greatest mistake the authorities made, turning a contained outbreak into a full-blown epidemic. It was a physical manifestation of a terrible idea. As the last nails are hammered into the wooden platform, the stage stands ready. It looks dark and expectant under the hot July sun. There are no decorations, no bunting, no cheerful adornments. It's a purely functional structure, built for a grim purpose. The city officials, satisfied with their work, now begin the process of herding the scattered groups of dancers from the side streets and alleys towards this central point. The city of Strasbourg has built a theatre of cruelty, and the unwilling cast is about to take the stage. The newly constructed stage and the cleared-out Guildhall stand ready, waiting for their exhausted performers. But the city authorities, in their profound and tragic misunderstanding of the situation, decided that the environment wasn't just missing space, it was missing motivation. If people were to dance their hot blood away, they needed encouragement. They needed a beat. And so the next phase of the city's misguided cure begins. The council puts out a call and opens the city's coffers. They begin to hire musicians. You see them arriving in the square, drummers with heavy, military-style side drums slung over their shoulders, fife players with their high-pitched wooden flutes, and pipers clutching bellows-driven bagpipes. These aren't virtuosos, they are jobbing musicians, the kind you might hire for a wedding, a festival, or to lead a procession. Now, they have been contracted by the city for the strangest gig of their lives, to provide an on-stop soundtrack for a play. They are instructed to play loud, energetic, and ceaseless music. The theory is that a strong, consistent rhythm will help the dancers focus their flailing movements, making the therapy more efficient. It will keep them going, pushing them past their limits, towards the point of total humoral exhaustion and, supposedly, recovery. The first musicians take their positions at the edge of the wooden stage. After a moment of hesitation, a drummer starts a steady, thumping beat. A fife joins in with a piercing, repetitive melody. The effect is immediate and horrifying. The dancers, who had been moving to their own silent, internal rhythms, are suddenly caught up in the external one. Their chaotic twitches and shuffles begin to align with the relentless beat of the drum. They are no longer just dancing, they are being driven. The music doesn't soothe them, it commands them, hijacking their already rebelling bodies. You watch as a woman, who had been staggering with exhaustion, is visibly jolted by the music, her legs kicking higher, her arms flailing with renewed, artificial vigor. The scene becomes even more grotesque. The music, intended to be therapeutic, transforms the public square into a macabre open-air asylum. The relentless sound echoes off the half-timbered houses, a constant, inescapable pulse that permeates the entire city. For the healthy citizens hiding in their homes, the music is a terrifying reminder of the crisis unfolding just outside their doors. It's the soundtrack of their city's nervous breakdown. One particularly bizarre, and often overlooked, part of this story is the hiring of strong men. Alongside the musicians, the council also paid healthy, able-bodied men to join the throng. Their job was not to douse themselves, but to support the afflicted. They were instructed to hold up the dancers who were on the verge of collapsing, to keep them on their feet, to physically prop them up so they could continue their grim, convulsive therapy. Imagine the job your role is to grab a stranger who is in the throes of a terrifying fit and dance with them not for joy, but to ensure they don't stop. This detail adds another layer to the tragedy. It shows a complete and utter failure to recognize the physical toll of the dancing. They saw the collapsing bodies not as a sign of extreme distress and impending death, but as a temporary impediment to the cure. The question of the musicians' and helpers' own psychological state is something history doesn't record, but we can speculate. Did any of them, surrounded by the constant, hypnotic rhythm and the sight of hundreds of people in convulsive fits, feel the pull of the hysteria themselves? It's a point of debate among psychologists who study the phenomenon. Was their paid, professional role a kind of psychological shield, protecting them from succumbing, or were they just as vulnerable, fighting their own internal battle against the madness they were being paid to orchestrate? The music plays on, day and night. The drummers work in shifts, one taking over as another collapses from exhaustion. The sound is the new heartbeat of Strasbourg, a frantic, punishing, artificial pulse. The city's leaders, believing they are helping, have created a perfect, nightmarish feedback loop. The dancing feeds the music, and the music feeds the dancing. The cure is now actively and aggressively spreading the disease. With the stage built and the musicians playing, the city's plan is in full swing. But the sheer number of dancers is quickly overwhelming the designated spaces. The central stage in the core market, which seemed so large at first, is now a chaotic, teeming mass of bodies. The Guildhalls, once symbols of order, are now echoing caverns of sweat, noise, and despair. The authorities realize their containment strategy is failing. The dancing is spilling out everywhere. So, they expand. The city's two main open-air markets, the grain market and the horse market, are officially and permanently cleared. These are not small side streets, they are the commercial lungs of Strasbourg. Shutting them down is a drastic move, equivalent to closing Wall Street and Times Square simultaneously to host a mandatory, citywide aerobic squash. But in the face of this escalating crisis, drastic seems to be the only move they know. You walk through the now empty horse market. The ground is usually churned mud, littered with straw and smelling strongly of animals. Now it's a wide open expanse of packed earth, and it's rapidly filling with dancers. The phenomenon has reached a terrifying scale. It's no longer a few dozen people or even 100. Contemporary accounts, which should always be taken with a grain of historical salt, claim that at its peak, as many as 400 people were dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. This is no longer localized curiosity. It is a full-blown social collapse. The city's normal functions are grinding to a halt. With the markets closed and travel through the streets a hazardous affair, commerce is crippled. Workshops are shuttered because the master, his wife, or his apprentices are among the dancers. Fields outside the city walls are left untended. The basic, everyday tasks required to keep a city of thousands are never being neglected. Here's a small detail that illustrates the breakdown of normal life. The city's tanners, who worked with animal hides and foul-smelling chemicals, were usually relegated to specific districts on the edge of town because of the stench. But now, even those areas are affected. The rigid, sound geography of the city is dissolving into a single citywide convulsion. The plague doesn't care about guild regulations or city planning. You wander through this expanded, city-sanctioned dance party, and the human cost is becoming starkly apparent. The dancers are a horrifying sight. Their feet, after days of non-stop friction against cobblestones and rough ground, are bloody and mangled. Their faces are skeletal, their eyes sunken and hollow. They are severely dehydrated, their lips cracked and their skin papery. They move with a terrifying, puppet-like momentum, long past the point of conscious control. They are trapped in a marathon that has no finish line. The sound is overwhelming. The constant, thudding music from the hired drummers is now supplemented by the sounds of the dancers themselves, the rasping, desperate gasps for air, the moans of pain, and the occasional, chilling shriek of someone whose mind has completely fractured. Historians are still trying to untangle the demographics of the dancers. Were they mostly women, as some early chroniclers suggested, or was it more evenly spread? Most modern analyses suggest that while WWII was the initial case, the affliction quickly spread across genders, ages, and social classes. However, it does seem to have disproportionately affected the city's poor and working classes, the people most ground down by the preceding years of famine and hardship. This has led to the enduring theory, still debated, that the dancing plague was, in part, a protest psychosis, a desperate, physical manifestation of unbearable social and economic stress. It was a rebellion of the body, when the voice had no power. As you look at the vast, swirling crowds in the cleared markets, you realize the city's cure has created a perfect storm. They have gathered hundreds of highly suggestible, physically and psychologically stressed people together in one place, subjected them to a relentless, hypnotic rhythm, and given them social permission to lose control. They've built an incubator for mass hysteria, and the consequences are about to become deadly. Days have blurred into a continuous, nightmarish cycle of music in motion. The city of Strasbourg is now a place you barely recognize. The initial shock and confusion have curdled into a kind of grim, exhausted acceptance. The dancing is the new normal, and in this new normal, you start to see familiar faces in the crowd. It's one thing to see a stranger, an anonymous face, caught in the grip of this bizarre affliction. It's another thing entirely when it's someone you know. You're standing near the Carpenters' Guild Hall, the air thick with the smell of sweat and the relentless pounding of a drum. Through the throng of flailing bodies, you catch a glimpse of someone. It's the baker, the one whose shop is just down the lane from where you've been observing. The man you saw just a couple of weeks ago, leaning out of his shop, a dusting of flour on his apron, muttering about Frau Roffier. His baker's apron is gone, his clothes are rags. His face, usually ruddy and cheerful, is a pale, gaunt mask. His eyes are wide and unfocused, and HES performing a strange, repetitive hopping motion, his arms swinging limply at his sides. He doesn't see you. He doesn't see anyone. He is lost in the damp. Later, near the horse market, you spot a young woman you recognize. She's the daughter of a weaver, a girl you've seen a dozen times sitting in the doorway of her father's workshop, her hands deftly working a loom. Now her hands are clenched into tight fists, and her head thrushes from side to side as she spins in a tight, dizzying circle. Her long hair, usually neatly braided, is a tangled, matted mess. There is a look of sheer, unadulterated terror on her face, as if she's a passenger in her own runaway body. This is the point where the abstract horror becomes deeply personal for the citizens of Strasbourg. The dancers are no longer them, a strange and afflicted group. They are us. They are brothers, wives, sons, neighbors. They are the people you share a pew with at church, the merchants you buy your cheese from, the apprentices who fetch your water. A particularly poignant and often cited detail from the chronicles of the time is the mention of children dancing alongside adults. While some historians debate the accuracy of these claims, the idea itself is horrifying. Imagine seeing a child, small and frail, caught in the same relentless, convulsive motion, their body being ravaged by an exhaustion it was never meant to endure. This detail, whether wholly factual or an exaggeration born of panic, speaks to the complete breakdown of the natural order. The psychological toll on the healthy citizens is immense. How do you go on with your day when your neighbor is dancing themselves to death in the towns, where you see people trying to intervene, breaking through the cordon of hired helpers to reach their loved ones? A man rushes to his wife, grabbing her by the shoulders, shaking her, screaming her name. But it's like trying to wake someone from the deepest, most terrifying nightmare. She either doesn't respond or struggles against him with a frantic, desperate strength trying to get back to the rhythm. He is eventually pulled away by the city guards, who are now tasked with maintaining the therapeutic space, and he collapses by the side of the street, weeping with helplessness. This raises a question that historians and psychologists find fascinating. What was the internal experience of the dancers? Were they conscious, trapped and aware inside their own bodies? Unable to stop, or were they in a dissociative state, a trance-like stupor where the conscious mind had completely shut down? The accounts, written by outsiders, can't tell us. They only describe the external movements. The inner world of the dancers remains the great, silent mystery at the heart of the plague. We are left to guess at the terror, the confusion, the pain. The city has become a landscape of public grief. Every flailing body in the square, is a personal tragedy for a family hiding behind a bolted door somewhere in the city. The bonds of community, already frayed, are now being individually and brutally severed, and the music, the city-sponsored, non-stop music, plays on, a cruel and mocking counterpoint to the silent, spreading sorrow. The non-stop city-sponsored dance party has been going on for days, and the human body, even one fueled by a mysterious, hysterical energy, has its limits. The authorities, in their wisdom, believed that the dancers would simply burn out the sickness and then, presumably, just stop and go home for a nice nap. They were catastrophically wrong. The breaking point, when it came, was not one of recovery. You are standing in the grain market, amidst the oppressive heat and the relentless, pounding rhythm of the drums. The air is thick with dust and the sour smell of unwashed bodies. You've been watching the same people for hours, their movements becoming increasingly ragged and desperate. Then, it happens. A man in the center of the throng, who had been leaping and kicking with a manic energy, suddenly falters. His jumps become shorter, his legs wobble. He stumbles. For a moment, one of the hired helpers moves to prop him up, to keep him in the therapeutic dance. But it's too late. The man's eyes roll back in his head. He lets out a soft groan, and his body just stops. He crumples to the ground in a heap of rags and bone, as limp as a discarded puppet. A space immediately clears around him. The other dancers, lost in their own rances, seem to stumble around his still form without seeing it. The music, after a moment of hesitation, falters and then stops. A sudden, shocking silence descends upon the square, broken only by the ragged gasps and moans of the remaining dancers. This is the moment the illusion shatters. The bizarre, carnivalesque atmosphere, manufactured by the authorities, evaporates, replaced by the cold, hard reality of death. This isn't a cure, it's a public execution carried out by exhaustion. The chronicles from the period, most notably those written by the architect Daniel Spacklin later in the 16th century, are explicit about this. He wrote that the plague seized upon the people, and they danced day and night, until they fell down and died. Modern medical analysis confirms this isn't an exaggeration. The dancers were dying from perfectly understandable, if horrifying, causes: heart attacks, strokes, and sheer, total exhaustion. The continuous, strenuous physical activity, combined with the lack of food, water, and rest, was pushing their cardiovascular systems past the breaking point. One of the more grim and specific details mentioned in some accounts is the sight of the dancers' shoes, or rather the lack of them. After days of non-stop friction, their leather shoes would have disintegrated. They were dancing on bare feet, on rough cobblestones and splintered wooden stages. The chronicles speak of bloody feet, a simple-to-word description that conjures a truly gruesome image. The ground of the dance floors would have been stained with the blood of the afflicted. The first death sends a shockwave of panic through the city's leadership. This was not part of the plan. Their cure wasn't just failing, it was killing people. The confident pronouncements of the physicians about hot blood now seem like the hollow ramblings of fools. The tidy, medicalized explanation has been obliterated by a single, still body on the cobblestone. And it's not just one body. Soon, another dancer collapses. And another. The daily death toll begins to mount. Some sources claim that at the plague's peak, as many as 15 people were dying each day. 15 families receiving the news that their loved one had not danced their way back to health, but to their grave. The academic debate about the death toll is, as you might expect, ongoing. Did hundreds really die, as some of the more dramatic accounts claim, or was it a few dozen? The number inflated over time by storytellers and chroniclers eager to embellish a good tale. The precise numbers are lost to history. But what is undeniable is that people died. The dancing plague was not a harmless fad, it was a lethal, if mysterious, affliction. The sight of bodies being carried away from the dance floors on makeshift stretchers becomes a new, grim feature of daily life in Strasbourg. The party is over. The laughter, what little of it there was, has died. The city is now face to face with the consequences of its own catastrophic misjudgment. The cure has become the killer. The deaths change everything. The sight of bodies being carried from the dance floors acts like a bucket of icy water, thrown on the city's feverish cure. The flimsy, desperate logic of hot blood and dancing it out collapses under the undeniable weight of a corpse. A new emotion, colder and sharper than confusion, takes hold of the healthy population, pure terror. The retreat is swift. It's not an organized evacuation, it's a panicked, individual flight. You watch as people who were gathered on the edges of the squares, watching with a morbid fascination, now turn and flee. Their faces are pale, their eyes wide with the realization that this is not a spectator sport. This is a lethal threat. You hear a new sound spreading through the city, almost as pervasive as the drumming was before. It's the sound of doors slamming shut, the heavy thud of thick oak doors, followed by the scraping, metallic sound of iron bolts being thrown. Then comes the clatter of wooden shutters being pulled tight over windows, plunging the interiors of homes into a gloomy twilight. Strasbourg is closing its eyes, trying to unsee what is happening in its streets. The city, which just days ago was trying to force its problems out into the open, now turns inward, Thamesings into thousands of tiny, terrified fortresses. You find yourself an invisible guest in one of these homes. A small dark room smelling of wood smoke and stale bread. A family is huddled together. The father stands by the barred door, his hand resting on the wood as if he can feel the vibrations of the chaos outside. The mother tries to quiet her children, who can still hear the muffled sounds from the street and don't understand why they can't go out and play. Here's a detail about 16th century life we often forget: homes were not the soundproof sanctuaries we know today. Glass was a rare luxury reserved for the very wealthy or the church. A commoner's window might be a small opening covered by a wooden shutter, or perhaps a piece of oiled linen or parchment stretched over a frame. It kept the wind out, mostly, but not the sound. So even here in this locked room, the terror of the outside world seeps in, insistent rhythm of a distant drum that some desperate musician is still beating. The high-pitched, hysterical laugh of a dancer. The scrape and shuffle of feet on cobblestone. The home is not a refuge, it's an echo chamber for fear. People would have been employing old, deep-seated plague logic. They would stuff rags soaked in vinegar or herbs into the cracks around the doors and windows. This wasn't just to block the sound, but to block the miasma or bad air, which was the prevailing theory for how disease spread. They believed the affliction, the curse, was a physical substance carried on the wind, and they were doing everything they could to seal their homes against it. This is where a fascinating historical debate lies. What, exactly, were they so afraid of? Was it a fear of contagion? In a way, we might understand it that proximity to the dancers would somehow transmit the illness physically, or was it a more superstitious, psychological fear? Many historians argue the latter. They were afraid of seeing it, afraid that the sight of the convulsive dancing, the sound of the hypnotic music, could somehow infect their minds and hijack their bodies. The madness was perceived as being contagious through the senses. Closing the shutters wasn't just about bad air, it was about not letting the vision of the horror plant a seed in their own imagination. Life inside these self-imposed prisons becomes an agony of its own. The fear of the plague outside is matched by the growing fear of starvation inside. With the markets closed and work impossible, food supplies dwindle. The baker you saw dancing is not baking bread. The farmer is not bringing grain into the city. The confinement is a race where the dancing stop before the food runs out. The city is now starkly divided into two populations. The dancers, prisoners of their own bodies, are trapped in the public squares. And the healthy, prisoners of their own fear, are trapped in their homes. The social contract is completely broken. There is no community, no commerce, no public life. There is only the noise outside and the silence within. And in the suffocating quiet of these locked rooms, every citizen is wrestling with the same terrifying thought: the authorities have failed, the doctors were wrong, and no one is coming to save them. You are now one of the silent ones, observing the crisis from behind a shuttered window. The outside world has been reduced to a set of muffled, terrifying sounds. The primary sound is, of course, the music. Even though the official cure is a catastrophic failure, pockets of it persist. Some musicians, perhaps out of contractual obligation or sheer confusion, are still playing. The drumbeat is the city's irregular, diseased pulse. Thump, 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 it goes on for hours. A maddeningly stupid rhythm that worms its way into your head. You try to ignore it. You focus on the quiet interior of the room, the familiar patterns of the wood grain on the table, the slow crawl of a spider across the ceiling. But the beat is inescapable. It's a low-frequency vibration that you feel in your chest, in the floorboards, in your teeth. And then it begins. A subtle, almost imperceptible sensation. Your foot starts to tap. Just a little twitch keeping time with the distant drum. You try to stop it. You press your foot flat against the cool stone floor, focusing all your willpower on keeping it still. But the muscle has a mind of its own. It's not a conscious decision, it's an involuntary echo of the rhythm outside. Tap, tap, tap. You clench your fists, your knuckles white. A bead of sweat trickles down your temple. You feel a strange energy buzzing just beneath your skin. A nervous, jittery feeling that starts in your ankles and threatens to crawl up your legs. You stand up and pace the small room, trying to walk it off, but every step feels like it wants to fall into the rhythm of the music. The simple act of walking feels unsafe. This is the psychological battle that must have been waged inside every single healthy person in Strasbourg. The fear of succumbing was not an abstract terror, it was a visceral, physical sensation. It was the battle between the rational mind, which knows this is madness, and the primal, suggestible body, which is being seduced by the rhythm. This phenomenon is not as alien as it sounds. Think about being at a concert. How your body naturally starts to move with the music, how you tap your feet or nod your head without thinking. Or think about yawning. Seeing someone else yawn can trigger an almost irresistible urge to yawn yourself. Modern neuroscience calls this the mirror neuron system. Our brains are hardwired to mirror the actions and, to some extent, the emotions of others. It's a fundamental part of empathy and social learning. Now imagine that system being put under the most extreme pressure imaginable. You are in a state of high anxiety. You are sleep deprived from worry. You are possibly malnourished. And you are being bombarded, day and night, by a powerful, hypnotic stimulus, the sight and sound of hundreds of people engaged in a repetitive, rhythmic action. Your mirror neurons would be firing uncontrollably. The impulse to join in would feel less like a choice and more like a physical imperative. Historians and psychologists as pure suggestion versus a genuine neurological phenomenon. Was it a culture-bound syndrome, a psychiatric condition that only appears in specific societies under specific pressures, or was there a physical trigger, like the ergot fungus we'll discuss later, that made people more susceptible to this kind of rhythmic hypnosis? The contested theory here lies in the very nature of the compulsion. Was it a broken mind tricking the body, or a broken body tricking the mind? You shake your head trying to clear it. You cover your ears, but you can still feel the beat. You look down at your hands. Are they trembling? Is that a twitch in your shoulder? Every stray, unconscious movement is now a source of terror. You are engaged in a constant, exhausting act of self-surveillance. The enemy is no longer just outside the door, the enemy is potentially inside your own nervous system, a sleeper agent waiting to be activated by a drumbeat. The fear is no longer just about the dancers. The fear is about the dance, the fear that the rhythm itself is the contagion. And as you stand there, fighting to control the tapping of your own foot, you understand the most insidious part of the dancing plague. It didn't just make you a prisoner in your own home, it threatened to make you a prisoner in your own skin. The city is in a state of paralysis. The council's cure has failed spectacularly, resulting in death and deeper terror. The secular authorities, the men of commerce and law, are at a complete loss. Their rational, medicalized approach has blown up in their faces. So, as often happens when human systems break down, the people and their leaders turn to a higher authority. The focus of the city shifts from the town hall to the cathedral. The magnificent cathedral Notre Dame de Strasbourg, with its single, soaring Gothic spire, has always been the city's spiritual heart. Now it becomes its last hope. The doors of the cathedral, and of the smaller parish churches throughout the city, are thrown open. Inside, the atmosphere is thick with the sweet, heavy scent of incense and melting beeswax candles. Light filters through the stained glass windows, painting jewels of color on the cold stone floors. The sound of chanting, and prayer replaces the relentless drumming. Priests in their heavy vestments led solemn masses, their voices echoing in the vast, vaulted spaces. They preach sermons of repentance. The message is clear and terrifying: this is a divine punishment. The city, in its pride and its sinfulness, has brought this upon itself. The dancing is not a medical condition, it is a scourge from heaven, a physical manifestation of God's wrath. You watch as citizens who days before were hiding in their homes now creep out and flock to the churches. They fall to their knees on the stoned flags, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and fervent hope. They pray for deliverance, for mercy. They make donations they can't afford, lighting candles in front of statues of the Virgin Mary and the saints, hoping to buy a small measure of divine intervention. The city's entire understanding of the problem is being officially reframed. The physicians and their talk of hot blood are quietly sidelined. The new experts are the priests and theologians. The new diagnosis is not humoral imbalance but sin, and the new prescription is not dancing but piety, penance, prayer. This is a critical turning point. By declaring the plague a supernatural event, the Church reasserts its authority in a time of crisis. When medicine fails, faith steps in. A small, interesting detail is how this switch might have played out behind the scenes. The city council, made up of secular leaders, would have had to formally cede control of the crisis management to the ecclesiastical authorities. This represented a significant power shift in the city, a public admission that their worldly methods were useless against a force they could not comprehend. The debate among historians on this is fascinating. Was the turn to religion a cynical move by the Church to regain influence, or was it a genuine, shared belief by both the clergy and the lay people that this was the only path left most likely? It was a complex mixture of both. In a world where faith was woven into the very fabric of existence, turning to the Church in a time of inexplicable horror was not a last resort, it was the most natural thing in the world to do. But the new diagnosis of divine wrath brings with it a new problem. If this is a punishment from God, it must be for a specific reason. But what sin could be so grievous as to warrant such a bizarre and terrible curse? The city begins a desperate, public soul-searching. Sermons condemn gambling, blasphemy, vanity, and the perceived moral laxity of the citizens. The dance scene is a grotesque parody of sinful, worldly dancing at fairs and festivals. A wave of public penance sweeps through Strasbourg. People who are not afflicted begin to engage in acts of self-mortification, hoping to appease the angry heavens. They fast, they wear rough shirts under their clothes, they join barefoot processions through the streets, flagellating themselves. The city's atmosphere of fear is now layered with a thick blanket of collective guilt. But even as the healthy pray for forgiveness, the dancers are still dancing. Their numbers may have thinned due to death and exhaustion, but the core of the affliction remains. The prayers don't seem to be stopping them. The incense doesn't break the trance. The holy water doesn't cool their fever. The Church needs a more specific culprit than just general sinfulness. They need a name. And soon, they will look into the vast catalogue of saints and curses, and they will give the dancing plague a new, and very famous, name. The prayers and penance are not working. The city has confessed its sins, but God remains silent, and the dancing continues. The Church authorities realize they need a more targeted approach. General sinfulness is too vague. In the intricate spiritual world of the 16th century, specific afflictions were oft unlinked to the wrath of specific saints. If you angered a particular saint, they could strike you down with a curse that mirrored your transgression. The clergy of Strasbourg, searching for an explanation, delve into their WWII, the stories of the saints' lives, and they find a perfect candidate. The blame falls upon Saint Vitus. Suddenly, the plague has a name and a story. The priests begin to preach this new theory from the pulpits. Saint Vitus Vane was a young Sicilian martyr from the 4th century. The story goes that he was a devout Christian who, as a boy, cast out a demon from the son of the Roman Emperor Diocletian. However, when he refused to renounce his faith and sacrifice to the Roman gods, he was arrested and tortured. One of the methods of torture, according to legend, was being thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil, but he was miraculously unharmed. The legend grew, and over the centuries, he became the patron saint of a surprising number of things: actors, comedians, dancers, and most importantly, those suffering from epilepsy and nervous disorders, particularly a neurological condition that caused jerky, involuntary movements. This condition, Sydenham's chorea, was popularly known for centuries as street Vitus's dance. The connection is too perfect to ignore. The people of Strasbourg are moving with jerky, involuntary motions. They are, in a sense, dancing. Therefore, the clergy concludes, they must have offended Saint Vitus. The dancing is not just a random punishment from a distant god, it's a specific curse. A plague of Saint Vitus, sent by a slighted saint. This is a masterstroke of psychological reframing. It takes a terrifying, incomprehensible event and gives it a narrative, a cause, and most importantly, a potential solution. It's no longer anonymous horror. It has a name. You can treason with hot blood or divine wrath, but you can, perhaps, appease a specific saint. Here's a fascinating and slightly quirky detail about Saint Vitus's association with dancing. There's likely a historical misunderstanding. In some parts of Germany on his feast day, people would celebrate by dancing with great energy in front of his statue. Over time, this celebratory dancing became conflated with the neurological disorder that bore his name. So the very act that was supposed to honor him became associated with his curse. It's a classic case of correlation being mistaken for causation, a mix-up that had terrifying consequences for the people of Strasbourg. The theory of St. Vitus's curse spreads through the city like wildfire. It makes a strange kind of sense to people. They might not have known the specifics of their sin, but they now know whom they angered. The dancing is no longer just a dancing plague, it is now officially street Vitus's dance. The academic world still debates whether the name came before or after the fact. Did the church label the event street Vitus's dance because it resembled the symptoms of the known neurological disorder, or did the existing belief in a street Vitus's curse actually shape the manifestation of the hysteria itself? This is a classic chicken and egg problem of psychophystory. It's possible that people, believing they were cursed by the saint known for causing uncontrollable dancing, began to unconsciously perform the very symptoms they feared. The diagnosis itself may have become a self-fulfilling prophecy. With the enemy now identified as an angry Saint Vitus, the path forward becomes clear. The solution is no longer about medicine or general prayer. It's about pilgrimage and targeted ritual. The afflicted must be taken to a place sacred to Saint Vitus to beg for his personal forgiveness at his own shrine. A new plan is formulated, born of desperation and faith. They will gather the remaining dancers, the ones who have somehow survived the heat, the exhaustion, and the city's disastrous cure. They will force them on a journey, a holy pilgrimage to a remote chapel dedicated to the very saint they believe has cursed them. The final act of the Strasbourg dancing plague is about to begin. It will be a strange and sorrowful exodus. The new plan, born of theological certainty and utter desperation, is set in motion. The goal is no longer to make the dancers move more, but to move them to a different location entirely. They are to be taken on a forced pilgrimage to a remote shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, located in the Vosges Mountains, near the town of Savigny, about a day's journey from Strasbourg. This is not a gentle, pastoral procession. It's a logistical and emotional nightmare. The city authorities, now working hand in glove with the church, have to round up the remaining dancers. These are people who are profoundly unwell. They are emaciated, dehydrated, their minds lost in a trance, their bodies still twitching and jerking with the relentless rhythm. They are not capable of following simple instructions, let alone undertaking a long journey on foot. You watch as wagons are brought into the city squares. Not the heavy-duty carts used for grain, but simpler, open-backed farm wagons. The city guards, who just weeks ago were enforcing the more dancing policy, are now tasked with the grim duty of herding the afflicted. It's a chaotic and pitiful scene. Dancers are half coaxed, half forced onto the wagons. Some are so lost in their trance that they are lifted like sacks of flour and placed on the wooden beds. Others struggle, their bodies still trying to dance even as they are being restrained. A woman, her face a blank mask, continues to shuffle her bloody feet on the wagon's floorboards. A man, his arms tied loose him from flailing, still jerks his shoulders and head to a silent, maddening beat. Families of the dancers gather to watch, their faces a canvas of mixed emotions. There's a flicker of hope, perhaps this, finally, is the answer. Perhaps the mountain air and the saint's blessing will break the curse. But there's also profound sorrow and fear. They are watching their loved ones being taken away, carted off like livestock, to a place they may never return from. They press small tokens into the hands of the afflicted, a wooden cross, a piece of bread, gestures of love that go unnoticed by the vacant eyes of the dancers. One interesting detail that highlights the blend of the sacred and the profane in this endeavor is the uniform the dancers were made to wear. According to some chronicles, as part of the ritual, the pilgrims were given red shoes. The symbolism of this is debated by historians. Was red the color of martyrdom, associated with Saint Vitus, or was it meant to draw the disease down into the feet and out of the body? Another, more provocative theory is that it was a mark of shame, linking their uncontrolled dancing to the sinful red shoes worn by prostitutes. It's a small, strange detail that encapsulates the confused mix of piety, folk magic, and social control at play. The decision to move the dancers out of the city was likely driven by two motives. The primary stated motive was, of course, the pilgrimage for a cure. But there was almost certainly a more practical motive to get the problem out of sight. The public, daily spectacle of the dancing was a constant, terrifying reminder of the city's failure and vulnerability. It was bad for morale, bad for business, and bad for the authorities' reputation. Moving the dancers to a remote mountain shrine was a way of cleansing the city itself, of sweeping the horror under a geographical rug. The academic debate here focuses on the nature of this cure. Was it a genuine act of faith, or was it a form of disguised banishment by sending the afflicted on this arduous journey? Were the authorities truly hoping for a miracle, or were they simply removing the most visible symptoms of their city's social and psychological sickness? It's a question of intent versus outcome, and the historical record allows for both interpretations. As the wagons are filled, a strange and somber procession is formed. A priest walks at the front, holding a crucifix aloft. He is followed by the wagons, creaking under their sorrowful human cargo, flanked by city guards. The remaining citizens of Strasbourg line the streets, watching in silence as the grotesque parade makes its way towards the city gates. The music has finally stopped. The only sounds are the rumble of the wagon wheels, the weeping of the families, and the faint, terrible, persistent shuffling of the dancers themselves. Strasbourg is exporting its plague. The heavy city gates of Strasbourg creak open, and the procession begins its slow, sorrowful exit. The column of wagons, flanked by guards and led by a priest, trundles over the drawbridge and onto the dusty country road. For the people on the wagons, it's the last they will see of the city for some time. For the citizens left behind, watching from the ramparts, it's a moment of profound and uncertain relief. The visible manifestation of the horror is finally gone. You, the invisible observer, travel with the procession. The transition from the claustrophobic, echoing streets of the city to the open countryside is jarring. The air is cleaner, smelling of freshly cut, hay on damp earth. The sky seems vast and indifferent. But the pastoral beauty of the Alsatian landscape is a cruel backdrop to the human tragedy rolling through it. The journey is agonizingly slow. The roads of the 16th century are not smooth, paved highways. They are deeply rutted dirt tracks, muddy in the lowlands and rocky in the hills. Every jolt of the upsmudged wagon sends a spasm of pain through the already tormented bodies of the dancers. Yet, they continue their ghostly movements. A man propped against the side of a cart twitches his hands relentlessly. A woman, lying on a bed of straw, kicks her legs in a weak but steady rhythm, does not care about a change of scenery. The guards and caretakers assigned to the procession are grim-faced and exhausted. Their job is a living nightmare. They have to feed and water people who cannot control their own limbs, trying to get sips of water past chattering teeth and morsels of bread into mouths that won't stop moving. They have to deal with the raw physical reality of the affliction, the filth, the stench, the constant, unnerving motion. A little-known aspect of journeys like this in the 16th century was the danger from the landscape itself. These were not tamed, manicured countrysides, The roads passed through dense forests, which were, in the popular imagination, places of bandits, wild animals, and supernatural beings. For the men guarding this strange cargo, every shadow in the woods, every howl of a distant wolf would have added to the immense psychological strain. They were escorting a cursed flock through a perilous world. The procession becomes a traveling spectacle. As it passes by small villages and farmsteads, people come out to stare. They have heard the rumors, the wild stories from the city. Now they see the proof. They watch in a mixture of horror and pity as the wagons of twitching, vacant-eyed people roll past. They make the sign of the cross, whisper prayers, and pull their children close. The plague of Strasbourg is now on tour. Historians debate the psychological impact of this journey on the dancers themselves. Is it possible that the very act of being removed from the supercharged environment of the city was the beginning of the cure? The hypnotic feedback loop of the crowds and the music was broken. The stage was gone. The audience was gone. All that remained was the open road and the rhythmic bumping of the wagon. Did this radical change of environment begin to starve the hysteria of the sensory input it needed to survive? It's a compelling theory. The treatment, though conceived as a spiritual pilgrimage, may have worked for purely psychological and environmental reasons. By isolating the dancers from the triggers in Strasbourg, the authorities may have accidentally stumbled upon the only effective treatment a total pattern interrupt. As night falls, the procession makes camp. Fires are lit. The guards eat their meager rations, their eyes constantly returning to the wagons, where the dancers continue their relentless, shadowy movements in the flickering firelight. There is no rest. The night is filled with the same soft, shuffling sounds, the same moans of pain. The curse has followed them out of the city and into the dark wood. The journey takes its toll. It's almost certain that some of the dancers, already weakened to the point of collapse, did not survive the trip. Their bodies, unable to endure the added strain of the rough travel, would have simply given out. They would have been given a hasty burial in an unmarked grave by the side of the road, their pilgrimage ending far from the saint's healing touch. Finally, after a journey that must have felt like an eternity, they see it. The foothills of the Vosges Mountains rise up before them. Their destination is near. The shrine of Saint Vitus awaits. The last, desperate hope of the city of Strasbourg rests in a small chapel, hidden away on a remote mountain peak. The final leg of the journey is the most arduous. The wagons are left at the base of the mountain, and the remaining dancers must be brought up the steep, winding path to the shrine of Saint Vitus itself. The path is narrow and treacherous, a testament to the idea that pilgrimage should not be easy. The afflicted, many too weak to walk, have to be half carried, half dragged up the mountainside by the exhausted guards and caretakers. Finally, they reach the summit. It's a quiet, windswept place, far removed from the noise and chaos of the city. The shrine is not a grand cathedral, but a small, simple stone chapel. It feels ancient, infused with the prayers and hopes of generations of pilgrims who have come here seeking relief from nervous affliction. This is the place. This is where the miracle is supposed to happen. The dancers are laid one by one into the cool, dark interior of the chapel. The air inside is heavy with the smell of old stone incense, and a faint, metallic scent that might be from the offerings left behind. In the center of the chapel stands a wooden, carved statue of Saint Vitus. He is depicted as a young boy, perhaps holding a palm frond, a symbol of martyrdom. His painted eyes seem to look down on the suffering souls brought before him. The ritual begins. It's a strange and desperate ceremony, a mix of official liturgy and deeply ingrained folk magic. A priest brought with the procession from Strasbourg begins to chant a special mass in honor of Saint Vitus. The Latin words echo in the small space, a solemn and ancient sound. The dancers are made to make offerings to the saint. These are not grand gifts of gold, but small, personal, and symbolic items. They are given small wax models of limbs, hands, feet, legs, which they are to offer to the statue, a symbolic plea for the healing of their own tormented body parts. They are also given small crosses and told to renounce Saint Vitus not in a blasphemous way, but as a ritualistic act of breaking the pact or curse that binds them to him. Here we encounter one of the most specific and fascinating details of the treatment, recorded in several chronicles. After the Mass and the offerings, the priest would place a small amount of consecrated oil, specially blessed in the name of Saint Vitus, on the foreheads of the dancers. Then, he would lead them in a circle around the statue. And finally, the most crucial part of the ceremony, he would hand them the red shoes they had been made to wear and, in a symbolic act, command them to put the shoes and a small coin into the church's offering box. The curse, it was believed, was tied to the shoes. By surrendering them to the saint, they were surrendering the dance itself. The historical debate around this ritual is rich. Was this a deeply held religious belief, or was it a form of sophisticated, theatrical placebo? The entire event was a piece of high-stakes psychological theater. The arduous journey, the dramatic mountain setting, the solemn mass, the tangible, symbolic acts of offering the wax limbs and the red shoes, it was all designed to create a powerful, overwhelming suggestion of healing. It was a multi-sensory assault on the hysteria, designed to convince the dancers' subconscious minds that the ordeal was finally over. The curse has been named, the saint has been appeased, the ritual has been completed. You are now free. You watch as the dancers, one by one, are led through the ceremony. They are passive, their faces still mostly vacant. They are moved through the motions by the priests and guards. They hold the wax limbs, they shuffle around the statue, they allow the red shoes to be removed from their swollen, bloody feet. There is no single, dramatic moment of cure, no flash of divine light. No one suddenly stops, blinks, and asks, "Where am I?" It's a slow, gradual process. But as the hours pass, in the quiet, holy atmosphere of the mountaintop chapel, something begins to shift. The relentless twitching seems to lessen. The frantic energy begins to subside. The storm inside their bodies, which has raged for weeks, finally begins to calm, or simply by the profound power of a ritual that signals a final, definitive end, the healing, it seems, has begun. The days following the rituals at the St. Vitus shrine are quiet. The dancers remain in the care of the church, housed in makeshift shelters near the chapel. The frantic, convulsive energy that defined them for so long has dissipated, replaced by a profound and bone-deep exhaustion. They sleep for days, a sleep so deep it seems like a kind of hibernation of the soul. Back in Strasbourg, the city holds its breath. News from the mountain shrine travels slowly, passed by word of mouth from travelers and messengers. The initial reports are cautiously optimistic. The dancing has stopped. The curse, it seems, has been broken. A wave of collective relief washes over the city, so potent you can almost feel it. The church bells, which had been silent or tolling for the dead, now ring out in celebration. You watch as the survivors of the pilgrimage begin their slow journey back to health. It's not a magical, instantaneous recovery. Their bodies are wrecked. They are severely malnourished, their muscles are wasted, and their feet are all landscape of healing wounds. But more than the physical toll, there's a psychological one. They awaken as if from a long, terrifying dream, with fragmented, nightmarish memories of what their bodies have been doing for the past month. They are brought back to Strasbourg not in a triumphant procession, but quietly in small groups. The city that receives them is not the one they left. It's a city scarred and traumatized, trying to piece itself back together. As the last of the afflicted are returned and the crisis is officially declared over, a strange quiet descends. The stages are dismantled. The Guildhalls are scrubbed clean. The relentless drumbeat is just a memory. The summer of 1518 is drawing to a close, and the dancing has, for the most part, ceased. But why? This is the great, enduring mystery. What actually stopped the plague? The official explanation, the one celebrated by the church, was divine intervention. Saint Vitus, appeased by the pilgrimage and the rituals, had lifted his curse. For the people of 1518, this was the most satisfying and complete answer. It reaffirmed their worldview and restored their faith in the cosmic order. But for us, looking back through a secular, scientific lens, the answer is far more complex and remains a subject of intense historical debate. Did the cure at the shrine work as a powerful placebo? As we discussed, was the combination of ritual, suggestion, and the authority of the church enough to break the psychological fever? This is a very strong possibility. The dancers were given a powerful, socially sanctioned offer from their condition. Or did the plague simply burn itself out? A fire that has consumed all its available fuel will extinguish itself. Perhaps the hysteria had reached its natural conclusion. The most susceptible individuals had been afflicted, and many of the weakest had tragically died. The remaining dancers were so physically exhausted that their bodies simply could not continue the motion, regardless of their mental state. The plague may have stopped not because of a cure, but because of a total, collective physical collapse. Herein lies one of the most contentious debates among scholars. Was the decline as rapid as the onset? Some accounts seem to suggest a miraculous, sudden cessation of symptoms after the pilgrimage. Others hint at a more gradual petering out, with some individuals continuing to experience twitches and tremors for weeks or even months afterward. The neat, tidy ending of the story, a trip to the mountain and a miraculous cure, is likely a simplification, a narrative smoothing of a much messier reality. The chronicles, written after the fact, have a vested interest in presenting a clear cause and effect story. The church had an interest in promoting the miracle. The city council had an interest in showing that their final plan, at least, had worked. The true story is likely a combination of all these factors: the powerful placebo of the ritual, the environmental break from the city's hysteria-inducing feedback loop, and the natural, brutal burnout of the affliction itself. As autumn leaves begin to fall in the streets of Strasbourg, the city is quiet. The rhythm of life is slowly returning to normal. But it's a fragile normality. The memory of the dancing summer is a ghost that haunts the city. The great convulsive fever has broken, but no one is entirely sure why, and that uncertainty is, in its own way, as unsettling as the dancing itself. The autumn of 1518 settles over Strasbourg. The oppressive heat of the summer has given way to a crisp, cool air that feels like a clean slate. The markets are open again. The sounds of commerce, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of cartwheels, the chatter of merchants gradually return, papering over the memory of the drumming and the moans. On the surface, the city is healing. But if you listen closely, what you hear is the silence. It's a heavy, watchful quiet. People go about their business, but their conversations are more subdued. There's less laughter in the taverns, neighbors exchange pleasantries, but their eyes hold a shared unspoken trauma. It's the kind of silence that follows a great disaster, a quiet born not of peace, but of shock. You observe the survivors. The men and women who were taken to the mountain shrine are now back in their homes, but they are not the same. They move stiffly, their bodies still recovering from the long ordeal. They are marked people, set apart by their experience. Others are eyed with a lingering suspicion, as if they are still tainted by the madness, as if it could erupt again at any moment. They are living reminders of the summer when the world went mad. They carry the psychological scars. Many, it is said, were plagued by nightmares. Some were left with a permanent tremor, a faint, ghostly echo of the dance they could not stop. How do you reintegrate into a society after you have been a public spectacle of its deepest fears? How do you look your neighbor in the eye when they last saw you flailing uncontrollably in the town square? Your eyes vacant and your feet bloody. The social recovery was, in many ways, harder than the physical one. Here's a small, poignant detail to consider: the economic ruin. For the families of the dancers, the ordeal didn't end with the last twitch. A month or more of lost work, for a baker, a weaver, or a farmer, could be financially devastating. The city council, perhaps out of guilt or a sense of civic duty, did reportedly offer some small financial assistance to the families of the afflicted. But it was likely not enough to cover the debts incurred. The fields left fallow, the workshops left idle. The dancing plague left a wake of poverty and hardship that would have been felt for years. The city's leadership also has to reckon with the aftermath. They commissioned the stages, hired the musicians, and endorsed a cure that killed their own citizens. How do they account for this? The historical record is somewhat sanitized, but there must have been a period of intense, behind-the-scenes finger-pointing and quiet recriminations. The physicians who diagnosed hot blood found their reputations tarnished. The council members who approved the disastrous plan would have carried that failure with them. The official narrative, however, quickly solidifies around the miracle of St. Vitus. It's a much cleaner, more comforting story. It absolves the authorities of their fatal misjudgment and reinforces the power and wisdom of the Church. This version is what gets written down in the chronicles, what gets passed on as the official history. It's a classic example of history being written by those who need to create a tidy and reassuring narrative. Terrifying truth of the institutional failure is quietly swept under the rug of divine intervention. And what about Frau WWII, the woman who started it all? History is infuriatingly silent. We don't know if she was among the first to die of exhaustion, or if she was one of the survivors taken to the mountain shrine. She simply dances into the historical record, triggers a wave of mass hysteria, and then vanishes completely. Her fate remains one of the many unanswered questions of the plague. The debate over whether she was a patient zero with a unique neurological condition or simply the first to publicly break under immense psychological pressure continues to this day, with no definitive answer in sight. The summer of 1518 becomes a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to children. It's the story of the time the music didn't stop, the time the city danced itself into a fever. But as the years pass, the sharp edges of the trauma begin to soften. The story becomes less a lived memory and more a piece of bizarre folklore. And for centuries, that's what it remains, a strange, almost unbelievable footnote in the history of a single European city. But modern science, looking back, would begin to offer new and equally strange explanations. The silence that fell over Strasbourg was not just the absence of music, but the absence of answers. For the people who lived through it, the curse of Saint Vitus was a sufficient, if terrifying, explanation. They had their story, and they clung to it, but time marches on, and with it, human understanding evolves. The story of the dancing plague, once filed under divine wrath, would eventually be re-examined through the cold, hard lens of science. The first step in this re-examination is to count the cost. The exact numbers are, and will always be, debated. The city of Strasbourg did not keep meticulous, modern records of plague deaths. The numbers we have come from contemporary chronicles, which were often prone to exaggeration to make a story more dramatic. Did 400 people really dance at the peak? Did 15 people a day really die? Most modern historians are skeptical of the highest figures, but they all agree on the core truth: the event was real. It involved a large number of people, and it was lethal. Even a conservative estimate, say, 100 dancers and a few dozen deaths, paints a picture of a catastrophic public health crisis. Each death was not a statistic, it was a personal tragedy that ripped a hole in the fabric of a family and a community. Beyond the deaths, there was the cost of the cure. The city council spent a significant sum of money that a city recovering from famine could ill afford on a disastrous public health intervention. They paid for the construction of stages, the hiring of musicians and strongmen, and the final, desperate pilgrimage to the mountains. This was a direct financial cost, borne by the taxpayers of Strasbourg, for a policy that actively harmed them. Then there's the economic devastation we touched on earlier. The weeks of lost productivity would have had a ripple effect throughout the local economy. A master craftsman's death or incapacitation could mean the end of his workshop, leaving his apprentices and family destitute. It was a sharp, sudden economic shock to a society that was already fragile. But the most profound cost, and the hardest to quantify, was the psychological one. The trauma: an entire city was subjected to weeks of unrelenting psychological stress, fear, and grief. The dancing plague shattered their sense of order, their faith in their leaders, and their belief in the stability of their own minds and bodies. It revealed how thin the veneer of civilization can be, how quickly a society can descend into chaos when faced with something it cannot understand. Historians have long debated how to categorize this cost. Was the dancing plague a form of mass mental illness, a societal nervous breakdown? The term mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness is the modern label we apply, but even that feels inadequate to capture the sheer strangeness of the event. It was a psychic wound inflicted on the entire city, a wound that would heal over, but whose scar would remain in the city's folklore and memory. This process of counting the cost is where many of the academic disputes lie. Skeptical historians argue that the entire event has been sensationalized over the centuries. They suggest it might have been a much smaller, more contained event, perhaps a localized religious revival involving ecstatic dancing that was later exaggerated into a deadly plague. They point to the unreliable nature of the primary sources and the human tendency to embellish a strange story. Many historians argue that the consistency across multiple, independent chronicles points to a real and widespread crisis. The debate over the scale of the plague, the true cost, is a debate about how we read and interpret historical evidence itself. As Strasbourg rebuilt and recovered, the memory of the dancing summer became a fixed point in its history. A bizarre, dark chapter. For centuries the story would lay dormant, a piece of local history. It would take the development of new fields, psychology, sociology, mycology, to pry it open again and ask a new question: what if the cause wasn't in the heavens, or in the mind, but in the bread? Centuries pass. The story of the dancing plague of 1518 remains a historical curiosity, a bizarre footnote filed away with tales of sea monsters and other pre-scientific oddities. Then in the 20th century, a new and compelling suspect emerges from a completely different field of study: mycology, the study of fungi. The theory that dancers of Strasbourg weren't cursed or crazy, they were poisoned. The proposed culprit is a fungus called Calavice bs purpurea, more commonly known as ergot. Ergot is a parasitic fungus that grows on rye and other related grains. In a wet, cool growing season followed by a warm, damp spring, conditions that were common in the Rhine Valley, ergot can thrive. Infected rye is harvested and milled into flour. The fungus goes with it. The ergot bodies, which look like small, dark purplish-black kernels, get ground up and baked into the daily bread of the populace, and dry bread was the absolute staple food for the common people of 16th century Strasbourg. What makes this theory so compelling is what ergot does to the human body. The fungus contains powerful psychoactive and toxic alkaloids. Ingesting ergot-contaminated flour can lead to a condition called ergotism, which has two main forms. The first is gangrenous ergotism, which causes intense burning sensations in the limbs, a condition historically known as street. Anthony's fire, followed by gangrene and the loss of fingers, toes, or entire limbs. The second form is convulsive ergotism. And the symptoms of convulsive ergotism are more chillingly familiar. They include painful muscle spasms, violent twitching, convulsions, delirium, and terrifying hallucinations. Sufferers describe feeling like insects are crawling under their skin. They experience vivid, often monstrous visions. Their bodies are racked by uncontrollable, jerky movements. Sound familiar? It sounds a lot like a dancing plague. This theory, first proposed in detail by medical historian John Waller, seems to fit the facts beautifully. It provides a biological, scientific explanation for a seemingly supernatural event. The people of Strasbourg, already weakened by famine, could have been eating contaminated dry bread for weeks. The ergot alkaloids would build up in their systems, leading to the bizarre neurological symptoms that were interpreted as dancing. It would also explain why the affliction seemed to primarily affect the poor. The wealthy citizens of Strasbourg could afford to eat more expensive wheat bread, which is far less susceptible to ergot infection. The poor ate the cheap, dark rye bread, making them the primary victims. However, as neat as the ergot theory is, it has its problems, and this is where a major academic debate still rages. Many historians and scientists point out significant inconsistencies. First, while ergotism causes convulsions and spasms, it doesn't typically manifest as coordinated, day-after-day dancing. The movements are usually more erratic and painful. Could hundreds of people have sustained such a high level of physical activity for weeks on end while suffering from a debilitating poison? Second, there are the other symptoms of ergotism. The chronicles of the dancing plague, for all their detail about the dancing itself, make no mention of the hallmark symptoms of gangrenous ergotism, nor of the severe gastrointestinal distress and vomiting that usually accompany ergot poisoning. Furthermore, ergot is highly toxic. It's unlikely that people could have ingested enough of it to cause such extreme neurological symptoms without also succumbing to its more lethal effects much more quickly. The death toll, while tragic, seems low for a mass poisoning event of this scale, so the ergot theory remains just that, a theory. It's a compelling and elegant explanation, but one that doesn't quite fit all the known facts. The academic world is split. Some scholars are convinced it's the answer, perhaps a specific, unknown strain of ergot that produced this unique set of symptoms. Others dismiss it entirely, arguing that the discrepancies are too great. The debate is a perfect example of the limits of historical forensics. We can propose a scientific explanation, but without a time machine to go back and test the flour, we can never be 100% certain. The idea of a poison in the bread, a hidden enemy in the most basic source of life, adds another layer of horror to the story. But if it wasn't Turgot, what was it? This pushed historians and psychologists to look again at the minds, not the bodies, of the dancers, leading to the theory that is now the most widely accepted, if still unsettling, explanation of all. If it wasn't a curse from a saint, and it wasn't poison in the bread, then what was it? We are left with one final, deeply unsettling suspect: the human mind itself. The most widely accepted explanation among historians and psychologists today is that the dancing plague of 1518 was a case of mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is not a diagnosis of individual madness. It's the diagnosis of a collective psychological breakdown. It suggests that the people of Strasbourg were not sick in their bodies, but in their shared consciousness. They were the victims of a psychic epidemic, a contagion of the mind, spread not by a microbe, but by fear and suggestion. To understand this theory, you have to place yourself back into the terrifying world of 1518th, as we've established. This was not a happy, stable society. It was a community living on the knife edge of survival. They were reeling from years of brutal famines, failed harvests, and rampant poverty. The price of bread, their very sustenance, was a source of constant life-or-death anxiety. On top of that, new and terrifying diseases like syphilis were spreading across Europe, adding to a pervasive sense of dreading. Their world was steeped in a deep, supernatural belief system where saints and demons were real, active forces in daily life. This created what sociologists call a fertile ground for mass hysteria. The population was a tinderbox of repressed anxiety, stress, and trauma. All it needed was a spark. Frau Rolfie was that spark. Her initial public display of distress acted as a trigger. In a highly suggestible, deeply stressed population, her bizarre behavior provided a socially acceptable template for the expression of unbearable psychological pain. People who saw her, or heard the terrified whispers about her, found their own internal anxieties bubbling to the surface. Their minds, unable to cope with the stress any longer, seized upon this strange physical outlet. They entered a dissociative state, a kind of trance, where the conscious mind checks out and the body acts out the repressed trauma. This is a key concept of dissociative trance. The dancers were likely not faking it. They were in a genuine altered state of consciousness. Their rational minds had been overwhelmed, and their bodies were being driven by the primitive, terrified parts of their brain. This would explain the vacant expressions, the inability to respond to others, and the incredible stamina. In this trance state, normal sensations of pain and fatigue are suppressed. A curious, supporting detail comes from the study of modern trance rituals. In some cultures, people enter trance states through rhythmic dancing and drumming, and they are able to perform feats of endurance that would be impossible in a normal state of consciousness. They can dance for hours without tiring and seem immune to pain. The events in Strasbourg, especially after the authorities foolishly hired musicians, look eerily similar to a large-scale, involuntary trance ritual. The theory of mass psychogenic illness explains why the cure of more dancing was so disastrous. It was like trying to put out a fire by holding a citywide fire festival. It amplified all the triggers: the rhythmic movement, the public spectacle, the sense of shared, chaotic energy, and spread the contagion of hysteria even further. It also explains why the pilgrimage to St. Vitus might have actually worked. As we discussed, the journey and the ritual provided a powerful pattern interrupt. It was a form of mass psychotherapy, a deeply symbolic and theatrical event that gave the dancers' minds a reason to believe the ordeal was over. The collective belief in the curse was replaced by a collective belief in the cure. The debate among scholars today is not so much if it was mass hysteria, but about the precise mechanisms. How much was due to the pre-existing religious beliefs about street Vitus's dance. Did the name create the symptoms? How much was a subconscious protest against the brutal living conditions? Was the dance a desperate, physical scream for help from a population that had no political voice? This is where the analysis gets deep and fascinating. The dancing plate can be read as a political event, a religious event, and a psychological event all at the same time. This explanation is, in many ways, the most terrifying of all. A curse from a saint is a story from another time. A poison in the bread is a containable, physical threat. But the idea that an entire community can be so consumed by fear and stress that it collectively loses its mind that feels chillingly modern. It reminds us that the line between sanity and madness, for an individual or a society, can sometimes be terrifyingly thin. As the memory of the dancing plague settled into the folklore of Strasbourg, it might have seemed like a singular, freak event. Abers are one-off in the annals of history, but if you zoom out and look at the broader historical landscape, you discover something even more unsettling. Strasbourg was not alone. The dancing plague of 1518 was simply the most famous and well-documented case of a much wider phenomenon of dancing manias that erupted across mainland Europe, primarily between the 14th and 17th centuries. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a pattern. Let's rewind a bit to 1374 in the town of Aachen. In modern age, an outbreak occurred. Chronicles from that time describe scenes strikingly similar to those in Strasbourg over a century later. Large groups of people, seemingly possessed, began to dance uncontrollably in the streets. They screamed, they claimed to see visions, and they writhed in agony, continuing for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. This mania didn't stay in Aachen. Along the Rhine and Moselle rivers, infecting towns in what is now northeastern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And there are other smaller accounts scattered throughout the medieval and early modern periods. In 1237, in Erfurt, Germany, a group of children reportedly danced all the way from their town to a nearby city. A strange story that has some eerie parallels with the legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. In the 15th century, a monk in a Swiss monastery was said to have been seized by a dancing fit that spread to his fellow monk. These earlier events provide crucial context for what happened in Strasbourg. They show that a cultural script for this kind of hysterical outbreak already existed. The idea of a dancing curse or a dancing mania was part of the collective consciousness of the time. When people in Strasbourg began to experience unbearable stress, their minds had a pre-existing, if terrifying, template for how to express it. One interesting detail that links many of these events is the invocation of saints, particularly Saint Vitus and, in some earlier cases, Saint John the Baptist. It seems that this specific form of convulsive hysteria was culturally and religiously coded as the work of these saints. This is a crucial point for the mass hysteria theory. The form the hysteria takes is not random, it's shaped by the beliefs and fears of the culture in which it appears. The debate among historians here is fascinating. Why did this phenomenon seem to flourish in this specific period of European history and then, for the most part, disappear? The period from the 14th to the 17th century was a time of immense upheaval. The Black Death had wiped out a third of Europe's population in the mid-14th century, leaving a deep societal trauma. This was followed by centuries of recurring plagues, famines, religious schisms like the Protestant Reformation, and brutal wars. It was an age of profound anxiety, a world where death was an ever-present reality and the social order felt perpetually on the brink of collapse. Many scholars argue that the dancing manias were a culture-bound syndrome of this specific high-stress era. They were a symptom of a sick society, a physical manifestation of the apocalyptic anxieties of the late Mitten, the scientific revolution. The belief systems that underpinned the manias began to erode. The world became, in a sense, disenchanted. Curses and demonic possession were replaced by neurological and psychological diagnoses. The cultural script for the dancing mania became obsolete, and the phenomenon faded away. Or did it? Modern sociologists might argue that mass psychogenic illness never disappeared, it just changed its form. Instead of dancing manias, the 20th and 21st centuries have seen outbreaks of fainting spells in schools, mysterious twitching epidemics spread by social media, or unexplained rashes in factories. The underlying mechanism, collective anxiety finding a physical outlet, remains the same. The symptoms just adapt to fit the fears and beliefs of our own time. Looking at the historical echoes of the dancing plague transforms it from an isolated curiosity into a case study. It's a powerful, terrifying example of how societies under extreme pressure can break in strange and spectacular ways. The story of Strasbourg is not just the story of one city's terrible summer, it's a window into the anxieties of an entire age and a timeless reminder of the strange and powerful connection between the mind, the body, and the world around us. And so here we are, 500 years later, still trying to unravel the mystery of what happened on those hot, dusty streets in Strasbourg. The stages have long since been dismantled, the musicians have been paid, the red shoes have turned to offering box. All that's left is the story, and the story, in the end, is the most enduring artifact of all. Why does this particular event continue to fascinate us? Why, out of all the plagues and famines and wars of the 16th century, does this strange, convulsive dance still capture our imagination? Perhaps it's the sheer absurdity of it. The image is just so potent, surreal, a whole city breaking into a dance it cannot control. It's a scene that belongs more in a dark fairy tale or a surrealist painting than in the pages of a history book. The story resists easy categorization. It's a medical mystery, a psychological thriller, a horror story, and a bizarre black comedy all rolled into one. Tragically ironic that if it weren't true, you'd think a satirist had invented it. Perhaps we are drawn to the mystery itself. The fact that there is no single, definitive, 100% proven answer is part of the allure. The dancing plague is a historical cold case. We can line up the suspects, the angry saint, the poison bread, the traumatized mind, and we can abate the evidence for each. But we can never be completely certain. To imagine what it must have been like. This is where the final, enduring academic debate lies. Not about the meaning. What does the dancing plague of 1518 ultimately tell us? Is it a story about the dangers of superstition and the failure of pre-modern medicine? Yes. Is it a powerful illustration of how social and economic pressures can manifest as physical illness on a mass scale? Absolutely. Is it a testament to the profound power of belief, both to cause and to potentially cure a mysterious affliction? Without a doubt. One of the most compelling modern interpretations is that the dancing plague is a story about control, or rather the loss of it, in a world where the common person had almost no control over their life, their health, their harvest, their salvation. The dance was the ultimate, terrifying loss of control over the one thing they truly owned, their own body. It was a physical dramatization of their powerlessness. And our fascination with it, perhaps, stems from our own anxieties about control in a complex and often unpredictable world. As you step back from the streets of 1518, leaving the ghosts of the dancers behind, you carry the echo of the story with you. You've walked the cobblestones, you've heard the whispers, you've seen the desperate dance. You've stood in the quiet of a locked room, feeling the phantom rhythm in your own feet. You've seen the failure of authority and the desperate turn to faith. The story of the dancing plague serves as a strange and potent reminder. A reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and battles, but a landscape of human experience, filled with moments of profound strangeness, suffering, and resilience. It reminds us that the line between order and chaos can be as thin as a drum skin, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that live inside our own heads, waiting for the right music to begin their dance. The beat has long since faded in Strasbourg, but the mystery and the warning still lingers in the air. And now, the story fades. The echoes of the drums grow fainter and fainter, until they are nothing more than the gentle, rhythmic hum of the fan in your room. The narrow, leaning houses of Strasbourg dissolve, replaced by the familiar shadows on your own walls. The frantic energy of the dance gives way to the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. In, feel the weight of your body, heavy and still and safe in your bed. There is no compulsion to move, no phantom beat to follow. There is only a profound and welcome stillness. The journey is over. You have returned from that distant, troubled summer, carrying nothing but the quiet resonance of a story told. Let the details of the past drift away like smoke. The names, the dates, the theories, they can all rest now. Let them soften and blur at the edges, becoming part of the vast, quiet landscape of your mind as it prepares for sleep. Imagine the city of Strasbourg, no longer in turmoil, but quiet under a blanket of stars, sleeping peacefully, just as you are now. The silence you feel is not the silence of fear, but the deep, restorative silence of the night. You are an observer, night. You are an observer, no more. In this moment, drifting gently towards the edge of a dream. Let the last thoughts of the day float away, untethered, and allow yourself to sink into the comfortable darkness, into the peaceful, dreamless sleep that awaits you. The end of the article. Good night.